And I'd like to start by taking a look at this watch and asking the question, is this a good watch? In order for us to be able to answer this question, we need to know what the purpose of a watch is. If you think that a watch is for the purpose of telling time, then we have to see whether this Lego watch can actually accurately tell time or not, and then we will know whether or not it is a good watch. On the other hand, nowadays, people have many other ways for telling time, and sometimes people wear watches to impress other people, in which case this particular watch might not be a very good watch. This watch over here, which costs over $200,000 the last time I checked, is a good watch. So it's important to know the purpose of something in order to judge whether it is good or not good. And the same thing can be said about classroom assessments and large-scale assessments. Sometimes we just think that one is good and one is not so good, but at the end of the day, we need to ask what the purpose of each one is. For example, let's think about some of these statements over here and determine whether it's something that's more appropriate for classroom assessment or for large-scale assessment. And the first statement we want to think about is assessment needs to include many items. Do you think this is true for classroom assessments or for large-scale assessments? Can you try to respond in the chat box, and let's see what you think. I'm gonna give you a minute to do this because there is a bit of a lag in this transmission. Now, I hope that many of you answered that assessment needs to include many items is something that is more true for large-scale assessment. In large-scale assessment, quite often we're making big, important decisions. For example, whether to admit somebody into a particular college program, in which case I think if you were in the position of the test taker, you would want a one-item test where your entire admission into the program depends on getting that one item correct, because it would not be very reliable. You might just get a score of 100 or a score of 0. But in classroom assessment, maybe we don't need to have that many items. Let's go to the second one then. A nod can count as assessment evidence. Is this something that is more true for classroom assessment, or is this something that's more true for large-scale assessment? I'll give you a few seconds to answer this question. Well, I hope you agree with me that in this particular case, a nod can probably count as assessment evidence in the classroom, but probably not in large-scale standardized exams. Okay? Nowadays, for example, there are a lot of healthcare professionals, nurses and doctors, who are moving to English-speaking countries, and they have to take a test of English language proficiency. And you don't imagine that the people in those countries will ask the doctors and nurses, is your English at the C1 level? And then the doctor or nurse will just nod and they'll say, oh, okay, because you say so, you can come here and start practicing as a doctor or nurse in this country. As you might imagine, that wouldn't be very good practice in large-scale standardized contexts, because sometimes we're making really high-stakes decisions and a nod is probably not good enough. On the other hand, in the classroom, there is a relationship between the teacher and the student, and a nod can tell the teacher that the student has understood what has been said and they can move on to the next point. So you can see that depending on the type of assessment, there will be different features to the particular assessment, and you need to take into account the purpose of the assessment in order to judge whether it is good or bad. The same thing is true for scoring, perhaps. In here, I have a list of a few different ways of scoring assessments. providing a score, providing a few scores, using a checklist, and then going all the way to giving detailed comments and providing peer feedback. And I think you'll agree with me that it is more likely that the first few ones will be used in large-scale contexts, and the last few ones tend to be used in classroom contexts for good reason. In the classroom, there are multiple students who are in there at the same time, so they can give each other feedback. On the other hand, in large-scale contexts, generally for admissions purposes, the receiving institution just wants to be able to have a number or a few numbers in order to make decisions. They don't want peer feedback. They don't want someone's friend saying, oh, well, yeah, Johnny is a pretty nice guy. I think you should take him. That's probably not going to be good practice in that case. So again, you see, depending on the purpose of the assessment, there will be different design features, not just in the task types, not just in the design of the test, but also in the scoring of the tests. This is part of the reason why I don't really like it when people talk about formative assessment versus summative assessment. In fact, one question will help us to see that this is actually not a good way of conceptualizing the issue. And here's the question. Can a summative test serve a formative purpose? Yes or no? I'll give you a few seconds to answer this question. Again, can a summative test serve a formative purpose? Type down your answers. I think most of you will agree with me that, in fact, indeed, a summative test can serve a formative purpose. That being the case, you can see that dividing things into formative versus summative assessment is actually not a very good way of thinking about things. In fact, quite often, it's a coded way of saying that the people who do formative assessment are the good guys, and the people who are doing summative assessment are the bad guys. But we should not think of it that way because, as you know about Luke Skywalker and Darth Vader, they actually are part of the same family. Okay? And in fact, whether we're engaging in small-scale classroom assessment or large-scale assessment, at the end of the day, learning is what we care about the most. And therefore, we need to think not in terms of good guys and bad guys, but how assessment in all its forms can help contribute to learning. With that in mind, let's consider, is classroom assessment always learning-oriented? And in order to think about this particular question, I'd like to share with you some classroom assessment practices that I encountered as a young boy, a young Asian boy, growing up in the Philippines. So here are some of the classroom assessment practices that my teachers have used, and you can tell me, please, whether these are examples of good learning-oriented assessment practices. Here we go. Find obscure information to make a test difficult. I have teachers who like to do that. Do you think that is an example of good assessment practice? I hope you agree with me that, in fact, that is not the point of assessment. It's not to make life difficult for students. That is not the purpose of it. If we want to be learning-oriented, do we give assessments because nobody did the reading, so I'm going to give a quiz? Sometimes my teachers got angry that nobody did the reading, so they wanted to give us a quiz in order to make us all feel bad. Again, I think you'll agree with me that this does not constitute good assessment practice. Here's another example. In the Philippines, where I grew up, basketball was a big sport. So sometimes what they would do in our school is give you extra points for going to the basketball game. Do you think that's a good example of learning-oriented assessment practice? I hope you agree. Again, the answer is no. Okay? Going to a basketball game has nothing to do with what you have learned and what you have not learned. And then a test that most people will pass, if everyone gets 100% correct, then the test does not help you diagnose what people do not know. And then again, if you give people a test where everyone will fail and everyone gets a 0, then you also don't know what they already know, and it doesn't actually help you in determining what the next thing is to teach. And so you can see that classroom assessment practices quite often are not necessarily learning-oriented. In fact, in order to diagnose whether an assessment practice is learning-oriented or not, I have found that this question is a very good way of finding things out. Here's the question. After a day at school, which of the statements below are you more likely to think of? Again, for those of you who are teachers, after a day at school, which of the statements below are you more likely to think of? And here are the statements. Today, what I taught was, or today, what my student learned was. Now, I'm sorry I can't interact with you in a more natural setting, but in other contexts where I have asked this question of teachers, quite often there's a quiet hush that comes upon the room, because I think for most of us, even with our best desires, quite often at the end of the school day, we're more likely to think of today what I taught was, rather than today what my student learned was. Now, these two betray very different mindsets. If we're thinking of today what I taught was, what we're thinking of is, have I delivered the particular content I want to deliver? And if I have, then my job is done, you know? But we don't actually know whether the students have learned or not. That's not actually a very learning-oriented way to approach teaching and learning. On the other hand, when we think in terms of today what my student learned was, then by necessity, we are doing assessment work. And if I may, this is what it probably looks like. That the students had a performance of some fashion, they answered a question, they filled in a worksheet, they talked out loud in class, and based on that performance, you as the teacher made an observation. Did they answer it correctly or incorrectly? Did they pronounce something appropriately or not? Are they missing some vocabulary or something? And based on that, we make an interpretation. Yes, in this particular case, the student hasn't learned this particular point, and therefore I will make a record of this, which might just be making a mental note, and then that will either lead me to provide feedback for the student or to go on and design other observations that I can make based on particular learning tasks. If we are thinking in terms of today what my student learned was, we will keep going through this particular circle, and that will make our assessments and our teaching learning oriented. Now let's move on and think. Can large-scale assessment be learning oriented? Well, let's think again about this particular circle, virtuous circle that we're thinking of. In large-scale assessment, are there student performances that are captured? The answer is yes. Could we make observations about their performance on a large-scale test? Yes. Can we make interpretations based on that? Yes. Can we make a record of it? We can give them a score. And based on that score, do they receive some sort of feedback? Yes, the score tells them whether they're doing well or not. And based on that, we can go back and decide to do something else in teaching and learning. So as you can see, even in large-scale assessment, it is actually possible to be learning-oriented. In fact, it's important to think about the function of large-scale and classroom assessment. I'd like to suggest that there is a vertical and a horizontal dimension to assessment. Large-scale assessment deals with the vertical dimension. In other words, dealing in the most general sense with what level students are at. I hope that you in the classroom, for example, are not sitting there determining that this student is at CFR level A1, whereas that other student is at CFR level C1, because that would probably mean you have a classroom with widely varying ability levels, which probably is not very good pedagogical practice. On the other hand, large-scale assessments are pretty good at determining for sure which CFR level, for example, one particular learner is at. And that might be the basis for placing them into particular classes. And after they've been put into particular classes, that's where classroom assessment comes in, the horizontal dimension. That is, you know that all your students are roughly at the same level, let's say CFR level B1, but they have different profiles of strengths and weaknesses. And those are the kinds of things that you as a classroom teacher are trying to assess so that you can optimally help each student in their particular area of strength and weakness. So you can see that classroom assessment and large-scale assessment can be complementary. So let me show you a diagram that would show this particular relationship. So you will see that in the middle in the circle is classroom assessment. The teacher makes observations about the students and helps them. But the larger part of this is that you can also use a large-scale exam, an external exam that you see on the top right corner of the screen, in order to make a record of achievement, which you see here at the bottom of the screen. And on that basis, make judgments about what levels students are at. And based on that, you can develop syllabuses and determine which classes they're put in so that they can go on and do the micro-level assessment in the classroom. Okay? So you can see that if we think in terms of learning-oriented assessment, then classroom assessment and large-scale assessment each have a role to play, and if they work together, then it actually optimizes learning for learners. Having said that, let's think. Can large-scale assessment be even more learning-oriented? And I'd like to think again in terms of this particular teaching learning cycle we're thinking of. Could we make the performances we elicit more appropriate? And I think the answer to that is yes. Here on the screen, I'm showing you the socio-cognitive framework for validating assessments. And what it tells us at the top of the screen is that when we're developing our assessments, we need to take into account the test taker's characteristics, their age, their level, what they know and don't know. And then based on that, we come up with test tasks that are contextually valid and cognitively valid. By that, I mean context validity means that the tasks themselves are similar to the kinds of tasks that the test takers would do in real life. And as far as cognitive validity, it is, does the task elicit the same sorts of mental and cognitive operations as in real life? And so as you can, if you think about these things, then for example, we can think for young teenagers, for example, you can come up with a test task like this one, where they have to determine, and this could be a speaking task where they have to say, what are the differences between the two pictures? So I know that when I was a younger person, when I was a young teenager, I always looked forward to the Sunday newspapers because the Sunday newspapers had this particular feature, spot the differences. So it's something that I found very interesting. And therefore, an assessment that uses a task like this will engage a learner and also be using the same cognitive operations that those learners will use in real life. So it actually helps make the test a more valid test for this particular age group. Or you could have a writing task where you ask the learner to look at a number of pictures and write a story about it. Now, this is also a task that a lot of us use in our classrooms. So you can see that if you come up with a large-scale assessment where the task is very similar to the kinds of learning activities that students use in the classroom, then there is less of a disjunct between the two, and it can help in being more learning oriented. In fact, even if you use multiple choice questions, the multiple choice questions can be more or less valid. For example, in this case, I'm showing you a number, 8 different multiple choice questions. The difference is that we have made all 8 questions on a related theme. So all of them relate to something that happens in the gymnasium. We know that cognitively for younger learners, if they have to keep switching back and forth between decontextualized items, then this presents a challenge for them cognitively. And so if you come up with a number of items which are all within the same general topic area, this actually assists them, and therefore you know that their answers are more about the particular vocabulary or grammar points that you want to test, rather than something that is affected by the fact that they are younger learners who still have developing brains. So as you can see, the particular test tasks, the particular performance you elicit from them in a large-scale test can be made to be more learning-oriented. At the same time, could the observation and interpretation, the scoring, be made more learning-oriented? And scoring is the thing that we see here in the middle of the socio-cognitive framework. Could the scoring be made more learning-oriented? And I think the answer to this, again, is yes. And let me go through this with you. In many cases, we saw earlier that quite often large-scale assessments just provide a score or a few scores and don't provide a lot of detail. Let's see what happens when we do this. If, for example, you score a speaking or writing performance holistically, that is, you just provide them with one number, let's say from 1 to 5, and let's say each one of those numbers relates to one level of the CFR, then the only kind of feedback you can give to the test taker is quite general. So everyone who gets a 3 will get the same feedback. You can do this at the B1 level, which means you can do this. Everyone gets exactly the same feedback, and therefore it's actually harder to do something with it. That's because you only provided one number. But let's think about what happens if you have a large-scale test where you provide a lot more observations that you can then interpret. In one of the tests we work on, I was trying to think about coming up with how we can make our large-scale tests more learning-oriented. And so for the writing test, we actually came up with a checklist scale with 18 different criteria. So for each one of them, there's a question around some particular aspect of writing. It might be punctuation or narrative writing, and the rater determines, in this particular case, did the test taker exhibit this particular skill? Yes, no, maybe, in between. Okay? With 18 different criteria, then we're actually able to get a different picture of 2 different learners. So for example, we can have 2 learners who are both at B1 level, but because we have recorded a lot of different aspects of their performance, we can give them different sorts of feedback. We can tell learner 1 that in areas 1, 3, and 4, and 18, you're strong, but you could use further work in areas 2 and 17. Whereas for learner 2, we could give them different feedback. And that is what we do. In the score report for our test, we actually give them unique personalized feedback. And this is made possible because we actually made a lot of different observations, making this more learning-oriented. As you can see, if you only make one observation, then you can only make one interpretation and provide one record and provide one example of feedback. But if you made 18 observations, then there is a lot more to interpret, a lot more feedback that you can provide. Therefore, making the test from a scoring validity perspective more learning-oriented, even if it is a large-scale test. We have also done the same thing with listening and reading tests. So we have a listening and reading test with 50 items. And for every single one of those items, we actually went in and tagged the different sub-skills involved that you actually need to have in order to be able to answer that question correctly. And because we have a lot of test takers, we're actually able to use statistical modeling to determine how learning actually happens. And actually, we have found, for example, that of the different sub-skills, we actually tag for about 20 different sub-skills, but I've condensed it here to about 5 of them, that they actually develop at different rates. And so, for example, that vocabulary is something that develops first, and someone who's at the A2 level has a high probability of having mastered vocabulary, but probably not syntax or reading for detail or reading for global main idea. Okay, I do not have the time to go into detail of this research, but let me say that I actually have made a series of 3 videos on this particular research, which you can find on our Michigan Language Assessment YouTube channel. It's entitled Michigan Test Talks, and the series is called What is Behind Reading and Listening? Insights for Teachers. In those videos, you will find me talking about not just the order in which you learn things, but also which ones are actually involved and are prerequisites for others, as well as, yes, at which levels somebody is likely to have learned which particular sub-skills. It is this actual research that we have done that we have put into the particular feedback we provide to test takers. So in other words, when we go into the teaching learning cycle, the interpretations we make are solidly supported by data and by research provided by the performances of a large number of test takers. So I hope you can see this particular presentation that things you can do to make classroom assessment more learning oriented, and at the same time there are also things you can do to make large-scale assessment more learning oriented. At the end of the day, what we want to do is to focus on this particular cycle: performance, observation, interpretation, record, feedback, and then subsequent performance. In our assessment practice in the classroom, I hope we can think, what are the kinds of tasks we can give to our students so they have a better read of their abilities? We can also make better observations. We can try to use many different sorts of observations, whether it be peer feedback, teacher observations, even self-assessment, so that we actually have a large base of observations on which to make interpretations about learners' abilities. And remember, even a nod counts as assessment evidence. And then we can make a record of these things and provide feedback and keep going in this particular virtuous cycle. The same thing can be true for large-scale assessment. And I hope you have seen today some of the things we can do to make this happen. We need to take into account test taker characteristics, come up with tasks that are good for them, that involve the mental and cognitive operations that are relevant in real life, and then score them in the best possible way in the greatest detail possible. And we know that as a result of it, the consequences will be more positive, and it will actually bear greater relationship with other measures of their learning. I hope this particular session has been helpful for you in thinking about assessments, not in terms of us versus them, but rather to think all of these can actually feed into learning. And if we think of them going together, this will serve our students best. Thank you very much for your time and attention, and I look forward to hearing some of your questions and dialoguing with you now. Thank you.
Thanks, Dr. 𝗥𝗲𝗀, for your presentation. If you have any questions for Mr. 𝗥𝗲𝗀, please leave them on the chat box, and we are going to select a few of them to share them on the screen. So answer.
Okay, I see a question here about how would you promote the assessment of 18 different criteria in large classes with 30 or 40 students. Okay, now the 18 different criteria I was talking about was for the large scale assessment that we do. Okay, having said that, the particular assessment that the particular criteria that we use here is actually a checklist, and therefore it's actually pretty quick in that it's just people answering yes or no. Okay, and if you actually phrase the criteria in very simple terms, it is actually possible for the students themselves to assess themselves. You know, can I use punctuation such as comma or period? They can decide, check yes if yes, or no if no. In classroom context, because there is no high stakes involved, then there is no incentive for the test taker to provide a false answer to the question, if you set it up that way, of course, and therefore it is actually possible to use checklists in the classroom, even if your classroom includes 30 or 40 students.
We have another from Maria Elena. What kind of test do you recommend for high school students?
Okay, well, my answer to that would go back to what we said at the very beginning of the presentation. What is the purpose of the test? And I think depending on the purpose of the test, you make decisions on what sort of assessment is appropriate for them. You also need to think about what level the students are at, which of the 4 skills are you wanting to learn more about. All of these things are the things you need to think about in order to be able to answer that question. Okay, I see another question from Gustavo on what other assessment tools can I use in a course with different EFL levels. Okay, so that's something that's good to keep in mind. You need to think about whether your students are all at one level or whether your students are at different levels. And you'll find that out there are actually assessments that are focused primarily on one CFR level, and there are assessments that are meant to cover several different CFR levels. So if your students are at different EFL levels, then I would recommend going for an assessment that covers several different levels so that it's accessible to all your students and all of them can succeed. Okay, so look into these different assessments because you will see that some of them will be more appropriate for your class than others. Okay, I see another question on how could we check that our children are really learning in asynchronous classes. That's clearly a very current question given how the world is right now. And I think the answer to that is that if it's not happening all at the same time, then we just need to come up with assessments at the end of each session, let's say, and ask them to submit their answers to those assessments so that we're actually able to take a look at them offline, see what they know or don't know, and then let that inform our preparations for the next class. Sadly, because it's not synchronous, we're not able to do it in real time, but that is the reality of the thing. Okay. Of course, it's also possible for you to, if your system allows it, it's possible for you to embed little quizzes within the system so that they themselves could know whether they have already learned something or not, and then they can be invited to go backwards and check whether they, to review something if they haven't learned it yet, or if they think they've learned it, to move forward. So I think there are different options available to us. Someone is asking, is there a pro tip on how we always have in mind learning-oriented assessment while planning the class? I think the answer to that is, it's not necessarily, I think the answer to that is to think, how am I able to come up with evidence on my students' learning based on this thing I'm trying to do? So any kind of assessment you come up with, if you think in terms of what information will this provide me about their abilities, then I think you're more on the path towards learning-oriented assessment. Okay, I see a question here. How do you feedback the students orally? I think definitely there are contexts where feedback can just be provided orally, right? If we were teaching in the classroom, we ask a student to say something, to answer a question, and if they answer the question correctly and we say correct, that's actually feedback right there, right? So sometimes it can be as simple as saying that's correct or nod, or sometimes it can be more sophisticated. If you've actually gone through a speaking test with them or something, then you're able to provide feedback and say, well, you did really well here. You were very fluent. You did this, you did that, but maybe you want to consider working a bit more on this or on that. So that feedback is actually possible orally, whether it's simple or more involved. There's a question here that says, do I suggest whether we should design different assessments for students that have learning difficulties? And I think the answer to that is we always want to design assessments that are appropriate for our learners. Remember, in the socio-cognitive framework, we always want to take into account the test taker characteristics. So we need to think about the particular learning difficulties they have, and then think, well, how can I modify my assessments, or how can I build an assessment that will actually give me a fair sense of where they are on this particular matter? So a question, how long do you think must be an assessment for elementary students? Well, I think you're teachers and you actually know what elementary students' attention spans are. So I think you should think with that in mind and then design your assessments appropriately. And again, it depends on the purpose. Sometimes it doesn't have to take more than a minute, but if you want it to be longer, because it's the end of term or a unit test or whatever, if you can't fit it within their attention span, then perhaps you want to give the test on several different occasions, so that you know that their answers, whether they're correct or incorrect, is because they know or don't know the answer, and not because they just could not focus anymore on the matter at hand. I see here a question. In assessing speaking, which aspects would you be focused in order to provide good and fallible feedback? And I would say, well, that actually depends on what you actually want them to learn. Of course, with any of the 4 language skills, there are actually a lot of different sub-skills involved. And so it depends on their level. If they're really at A1 level, chances are they probably don't have a lot of vocabulary, and you might want to start there. But if someone is at a high C1 or C2 level, then maybe you're even doing very sophisticated things with them, like their particular delivery, so that they have achieved particular rhetorical effects. Again, at the end of the day, it depends on what it is you're trying to assess, and then providing feedback that is targeted on that thing that you're trying to assess. There's a question here that says, do I think that summative and formative assessment are the only way to measure learning? Because nowadays, because of the pandemic, it's really hard to be aware of the learning process. Okay, I don't think that summative and formative assessment is the only way to think about things. In fact, I said I don't like the concept of summative versus formative assessment, but rather we need to always think about assessment in terms of how is this supporting learning. Okay, but people use assessments for lots of different reasons, right? We do it for promotion purposes. Sometimes it's to inform our teaching. Sometimes it's to place people into a class. Sometimes it's just a quick checkup. And so in this time of pandemic, because it's really hard, as you say, to be aware of the learning process, I think it's even more crucial that we actually have a wide range of assessments so that we're able to check up on our students and know whether they are indeed learning or not. Okay, and the ways we can design this, there's a whole panoply of different forms of assessment that we can, or different tasks that we can use in order to help us with this. Okay, there's a question here on, can we use a different skill in our assessments? I'm not sure what this necessarily means. I suppose what it means is, if we're assessing speaking, should listening be involved? Well, I think, again, it depends on our purpose, right? Quite often, speaking does involve listening. If it's a conversation, if it's speaking interaction, or the ability to speak interactively that we care about, as in the ability to have a conversation, then listening comes into play. On the other hand, if the speaking we're considering is just about the ability to make speeches, then listening does not necessarily come in, and then maybe we don't want to do that. If we make our assessments as close as possible to the actual thing we're assessing, that would in general make it more authentic and more appropriate.
Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Gat. We are going to close this first conference. So we're going to have one more question. You can choose it, and then we are going to close the first conference, and then we're going to continue with the next one according to the program.
Okay. Well, the last question I see here on my screen is, what's your opinion about the use of mother tongue on the EFL learning process? And I think this is not a question of my opinion, but as I understand it, there is actually a lot of research that shows that in the early years, when they are much younger, the use of mother tongue can actually help promote learning in a second language. Okay, because a number of these skills that they have learned in the first language are transferable. Okay, there's no, especially if their language level is very low, there's no point in forcing yourself in speaking in the second language if they're not picking up anything that's not going to help promote learning. So the answer to that question is, there certainly is a role for the mother tongue in the EFL learning process. It doesn't mean that they don't need to have exposure to the language they're trying to learn, in this case, English. A lot of exposure will help with learning, but there certainly is a role for the mother tongue. So do look more into it if you can. Thank you again for your engagement in here, even though it's somewhat more challenging because of the medium. I hope you have learned something, and thank you very much.
Thank you, Dr. Gat. Thank you to all for attending to our first online Richmond conference. This was our first talk. Well, things life get messy, so we would like now to share with you our global manager welcoming remarks. And then we're going to have our Richmond solution video, and we will start at 18:05 with our TOEFL talk. Thank you.
It has been a long road and full of challenges. Being bilingual on graduation day has been one of my greatest achievements because I now have the tool set to go on reaching all the objectives I might set for myself in the future. A world of opportunities opened up to me when I started studying with Richmond Solution. I was really able to learn autonomously. I could study at home, in the library, or in the classroom. I could dive into the book, or by being connected to the internet, I could explore fascinating activities that empowered my English skills. I was able to instantly access the answers as they were only a click away. I loved working in a team. My friends and I had great fun as we learned. I learned a lot from them, and I know that they learned something from me. The exams were always challenging, but thanks to the practice that was constantly available on the digital platforms, we were fully up to speed to meet these challenges. I am really going to miss my school.
Richmond Solution helped us hugely to transform the English program in our school. We have now got the best tools to guarantee the best learning. Let me show you. Part of the process gives us access to a coach who builds our confidence, as well as training courses to better our abilities and to continue our improvement. Yes, good teachers are always keen to learn more. As we live in the cloud, as we say in this connected world, we have digital resources to improve our classes and which allow our students to learn from anywhere in the world, even quite literally in the clouds if they are on board an airplane. Through the Richmond Test Manager and Learning Analytics, we have a variety of possibilities to test, validate, and monitor students' progress. It is amazing to be able to see how your students are learning and to have the evidence of their learning at your fingertips. This really does make us very happy indeed. Richmond Solution is a solution designed for you.
Good afternoon and welcome to this Richmond conference. This is the first time Richmond has held a virtual conference of this kind in Chile, and we're very grateful to you all for your attendance. Several hundred teachers, coordinators, and directors have pre-registered, which shows the high level of enthusiasm the educational community in Chile has for the teaching of the English language. My name is Christopher West, and I'm the Managing Director of the Languages Division of the Santillana Publishing Group. We're a leading publisher of English language teaching materials under the Richmond brand, and we also publish materials for teaching French and Spanish. Richmond may not be the first brand that springs to mind when you think of educational publishers working in Chile. Some of you probably think first of Oxford University Press, or Pearson, or Macmillan, or Cambridge University Press. So if I may, I'd like to spend a couple of minutes telling you a little about us. Richmond was founded in Spain in 1992, some 32 years after the foundation of Santillana. Between 1963 and 1977, Santillana established companies in almost all the countries of Latin America. The company in Chile was founded in 1968. It quickly became clear that school directors and teachers valued the curriculum materials that Santillana published in Spanish and in Portuguese, but also wanted materials to teach English. Richmond may be part of a Spanish publishing group, but what we publish is commissioned, written, and edited by some of the best professionals in the English language teaching industry anywhere in the world. Our editorial headquarters is in Oxford, long a centre of excellence in English language teaching publishing. We have subsidiary publishing units in Mexico City, Madrid, Sao Paulo, and Buenos Aires. We publish in both British English and American English, both for the private sector and for state schools. Today, Richmond materials are used by approximately 7 million students worldwide, mainly in Spain and Latin America, but also in countries as diverse as Turkey and China. Our publications have won prestigious awards in several countries, notably the Eltons in London, awarded by the British Council. So what makes us different from other publishers who contact the institutions where you work? Firstly, Latin America is at the center of our world. Roughly 80% of our sales come from Latin America. We listen to Latin American teachers, we understand the local realities, and we have a proven track record of successfully publishing materials that provide positive outcomes in the Latin American markets. In Chile, many of our sales come from locally published skill materials following the national curriculum, and our publications are frequently selected by the Ministry of Education for state school use. Secondly, as part of the Santillana Group, we have a solid, established company in Chile offering commercial and academic services and holding permanent stock. Our competitors, on the whole, work through distributors with a less complete infrastructure and dependent on imports from Europe or the United States. Our focus is on giving top quality service and building a long-term relationship. Thirdly, digital publishing is our main focus. What advantages does digital publishing have over traditional print publishing? Interactivity, adaptability, the use of artificial intelligence, trackability, reporting, to name but a few. Many publishers think first of publishing in print, and digital publishing is an add-on or an afterthought. In Richmond, we think digital first, because we believe teachers deserve the most flexible material and measurable outcomes. Fourthly and finally, we believe in creating partnerships with other leading players in education. What we do well is publishing, the creation of educational copyrights. But increasingly, publishers aspire to provide customers with a complete educational service, including, for example, access to a virtual library and to certification by renowned specialist institutions. Rather than offer these complementary services ourselves, we prefer to create partnerships with the real specialists. And that's why in this conference, we're pleased to present speakers from ETS, the publishers of the TEFL exams, Michigan Language Assessment, Britain's prize-winning digital publisher, Just2Easy, and MyOn, publishers of an extensive fiction and non-fiction virtual library and part of the Renaissance Group. We want to empower you. And we want to be your first port of call for educational services involving English language teaching. We hope you'll enjoy the highly varied presentations we've organized for you, delivered by an international team of qualified speakers who really know their stuff. Successful English language teaching can make a big difference to a school's reputation and to the opportunities available to students when they leave school. Let Richmond be your partner in achieving that dream. Thank you very much for your attention and enjoy the conference.
Thank you, everyone. That was Mr. Christopher West, our Global Manager for Richmond. Dear teachers, colleagues, heads of study, principals, good afternoon. Well, actually, good evening, and thank you for joining us. It is a great pleasure for Richmond to introduce our second speaker today. She's going to talk about integrated skills approach. She will present us some of the implication of integrating the 4 skills in classroom, teaching and review techniques and ideas for activities that promote this approach. Here, she will put the theory in practice. Our speaker holds an MA in Philology and Languages from Universidad Nacional de Colombia, and since 2009, she holds the position of Pedagogical Manager at EduSoft, a subsidiary of Educational Testing Service and Richmond Partner, which is the creator of the TOEFL and TOEIC test. She has worked as an English coordinator, English teacher, and an online teacher in Colombia, United States, and Spain. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming home Mrs. Jasmine Camargo.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is a pleasure for me to be here, giving this presentation. I'm going to talk about integrated skills approach. So let's start with the session objectives. I'm going to start, by describing integrated skill approach, its benefits, and the impact it has on learning and teaching English. Also, one of the objectives is comparing integrated skill approach to segregated skill approach, providing some techniques on how to integrate language skills, and I'm going to combine these with some activities that I'm going to use in a lesson to show you how these language skills can be integrated. So let's start. I would like to start by emphasizing, on the objective, the main objectives that we have when English learning and English teaching. The first one is to develop communicative competence, and the second one is to gain access to social, vocational, educational, or professional opportunities. We need to provide the tools to help our students to reach those goals, to be competent when talking in different contexts. So, as Davis and Pierce stated, the real success in English teaching and learning is when learners can actually communicate in English inside and outside the classroom. So we need to give them and to use different methods to help them succeed in communication, not only in the classroom, but outside. So as Norris stated, the majority of communicative situations require language users to employ multiple skills and to integrate various types of knowledge into their communication efforts. However, some instances of language use only one skill and they put aside the other skills when teaching English. So let's see. I'm going to talk about now two approaches. I'm going to compare to the integrated skill approach, which integrates all four skills, and segregated skill approach, which present each skill in isolation. So let's talk about, I have this table here about some aspects from both segregated skill approach and integrated skill approach. So some teachers use the segregated skill approach because they find it easier to teach and to organize their plan of study, their lesson plans around one skill. However, the integrated skill approach integrates all four language skills: reading, listening, writing, and reading. The segregated skill approach also does not lead to optimal language learning, while the integrated skill approach promotes authentic and real-life communication. We prepare our students to be able to communicate in different contexts. The segregated skill approach helps students develop their knowledge of the language, so it focuses on structure mainly. However, the integrated skill approach enables students to use their knowledge in real communicative contexts. And in terms of materials, when we talk about segregated skills approach, the lessons and the materials tend to be monotonous, while in the integrated skill approach, teachers can use a variety of materials and activities. So it's very important to note here that integrated skill approach has benefits for both for teachers and students, because teachers have the option of using a lot of materials, and also students get benefit because they know they get the tools to do something with what they're learning. So we can see here that integrated skill approach seems to be the most effective as it seeks to teach English as a means of communication. All right, now that we have seen these two approaches, the segregated skill approach and integrated skill approach, I would like to hear you hear you in the chat to know. I want to know which approach do you use when teaching English. So we are going to use the chat. So please feel free to post your messages and your experiences on the chat. Which approach do you use in your lessons? Segregated or integrated skill approach? Okay. The chat is open, so you can start posting your messages and your experiences. All right. Integrated approach, integrated. Paula said that it depends on the lessons. Maria, nowadays integrated skills. Okay. Most of you are saying that you use the integrated skill approach. Lourdes, we try to integrate the 4 skills, but we are supposed to evaluate only one competence. Okay. Yeah, when using the integrated skill approach, you know, that's one of the benefits and the advantages that we as teachers have, because we can see, we can track students' progress in every single skill. So we can also monitor and find challenges and also come up with solutions. Perfect. Thank you very much. We're going to stop here the chat and continue with the presentation. All right. There are 2 types of integrated skill instructions. One is content-based language instruction and task-based instruction. The content-based language instructions emphasizes learning content through language. So we are going to integrate, apart from integrating the skills, the language skills, we're also integrating content from other subjects like science, math, social studies, etc. The task-based instructions stresses doing tasks that require communicative language use. So in that case, we are giving our students tasks to communicate. And in this instruction, we use a lot of pair work, group work. So because we are creating the context, the communicative context. Now, integrating all 4 skills, how are we going to do that? How am I going to integrate listening, speaking, reading, and writing in one lesson? Because in theory, it sounds beautiful, wonderful, but how do we do it in the practice? So first of all, I want to talk about the skills. You know, the 2 types of skills that we have: receptive skills and productive skills. The receptive skills are the listening and the reading, which are, you know, the input messages that a person receives in order to communicate, in order to produce something. So then we move on to the productive skills, which are speaking and writing. So one person listens to a message, to a conversation, and then he has to produce something by speaking, and also with reading and writing. I read a paragraph, and then I can be asked, you know, to write a letter, to submit an answer. So here, those 2, the receptive and productive skills work together in terms, you know, to have to reach the objective, which is to communicate. Now, let's talk about some techniques for integrating all 4 language skills. All right, we already saw the skills, the types of skills that we have. So here are some techniques that you can use when planning a lesson. So first, you need to select one topic, right? That's very important that you have one topic and you are going to expand this topic, and students will get, to know many things about that specific topic. The other technique, it start by receptive skills. So, for example, you do a listening activity and you combine it with a speaking activity. And if you do reading, then you do a writing task. Also, it's very important to choose the material that we are going to use in the lessons. They have to be authentic and engaging, right? Because we are exposing our students to real life and authentic language. So we can use videos, songs, letters, ads, news, etc. We have a lot of things to, to choose from. There are also two modules that you can use when planning your class. The first one is the receptive productive skill sequence module, or input interaction output theory, which means the student first are exposed to language data. It can be listening or reading. Remember that we are going to start with one of these skills, all right? That will be the input that the students have. Once they have got this input, we move on to interaction, where students will listen again, will read again the text, and they will answer some comprehension questions, reading comprehension questions, listening comprehension questions. And after we have, been working on the reading, on the listening, we move on to the third step, which is the output, when students are ready to produce, either way, spoken or written way. But it's a process. We cannot just ask students to produce something if we haven't given them a structure. Now, the second model is the productive receptive skill sequence model. This one is less structured than the previous one. And in here, we use pre-reading or pre-listening activities. And then we move on to the reading or listening activities. So, for example, this technique is very used when we do warm-up activities that we brainwash students and we ask them things. We don't care about the structure. We are not paying attention to structure. We just want our students to communicate. And then we will present the more complex activity. So we talk about theory, and now let's put it into practice. So in order to do this, I'm going to use the TOEFL Junior English Learning Center course, and I'm going to work on the unit called Save the Earth Week. Remember, we focused on one topic. I'm going to start by integrating reading and writing. So my purpose is that my students will be able to read an article, a passage, a letter, and then they will be able to write, okay, to give output, to communicate. So I have this letter. I have my students read this letter. Here we can work on vocabulary, on structures if you want. And once my students have read this letter, we move on to reading comprehension activities. We have a bunch of activities, that we can do in the class, in the lessons. We can do the dragging activities, matching activities, filling in the blanks, multiple choices. So it's up to your imagination. And, as I said, the integrated skills allows teachers use a lot of materials and activities. Okay, once we have been working on comprehension, we're going to get our students ready to write. So, for example, in this letter that we have here, which talks about the Save the Earth Week. We are talking about the environment and things that the students can do to help the environment. They are going to send another letter answering this one, the previous one. So the question here is, which of the following sentences would you expect to read in a reply to this letter? And you provide the students with some options. Those options are not only, like giving them some ideas on how to reply, but also they're getting structures and ways on how to reply the letter. And then we do the personalized writing activity. My students have already some background, vocabulary, some phrases, and I can now ask them to write. However, when given students these kind of tasks, we cannot just throw them there to the water, like say, write this letter. We need to give them structure, and that's something that we always need to keep in mind. So first of all, we are giving the student the role that he is playing when answering that letter. In here, the student is a student representative for Kids for Planet Earth. So, and I'm giving the students some tips. What do they need to do? What kind of questions? If the previous letter had questions, so they need to answer to those questions. And I also include some phrases that can help my students structure their texts. And then, this activity can follow. I want to sum up the steps that we have done so far. First, we present the reading passage, then work on comprehension questions. We prepare the students to write. Then we gave them instructions. Remember, specify the role, answer questions, ask for more information. What do they need to do when writing? Provide students with some phrases or vocabulary. Have students write the text. But that cannot be the end of the process. You can also incorporate other activities, such as exchanging texts for feedback. So my students can work in pairs or in groups. They check their peers' work, and then they give feedback. After receiving the feedback, my students can edit their texts. And once the student has edited the text, he's ready to share the text with the class. Okay, and I want you to think what could be done next in order to integrate another skill. From your experience or ideas, what could be next? So in the chat, please type your answers. What activity could be followed here? I'm going to check your comments. All right. Remember the question. What could be done next in order to integrate another skill? If I want my activity to continue, I did reading, I did writing, but I want my students to do something else. What ideas do you have? What skill would you incorporate in this activity? All right, let's see. Let's talk about the activities that we could incorporate, that we could present our students after doing a writing activity. Okay. Listening and speaking activities, Araceli. Yeah, which is basically what I'm going to do now. All right, Esteban, you're talking about rubrics that allow them to know what the teachers expect them from to do. Listening and then speaking. Good. So you can see here, how you can integrate speaking and other skills into one activity. We're talking about one topic. Great. Speaking activity, real case. Thank you very much. We're going to move on with the presentation. So I'm going to continue this activity by integrating listening and speaking. So in this activity, my students will listen to a dialogue between a teacher and a student. I always give my students context. First, they listen to the dialogue, and then you can combine the listening and with the reading. So the students will be listening to the conversation while reading the text. After they have done that, we do listening comprehension activities. Okay, we want to make sure that our students understood what they listened to, what they heard. Once we make sure that they have understood, that they have a better idea of what the dialogue was about, we do a speaking practice activity. Again, it takes some steps. It's not only asking students to talk, we need to prepare them. So here, in this activity that you see on the screen, you see that the student can choose the character that he wants to play the role from. So if he wants to be the teacher or if he wants to be the student. The student can record, can be part of this conversation, and this is helping him prepare for the moment when he has to speak and produce his own message. So here we have another activity that is getting the student ready to speak. In this activity, I provide student with some structures that then he can use in the personalized speaking activity. When doing personalized speaking activities, it is also important to give structure, to give students, all the guidelines, what they need to do, what are they expected to do. So here, for example, talk about what you can do to help the environment. Answer these questions. So my students are already prepared to answer these questions. So I have the list of questions that I want my students to talk about, and I can also add some phrases to help them do their speaking activity. So to sum up, first we listen to a dialogue or the audio, then have students read the script while listening to the audio. We also check comprehension, have students role play the activity to give them structure, to work a little bit on a sequence. So ask students to identify what they will be asked later, right? We are giving them some tips, not just telling them that they have to talk about the environment, for example, or things that they do to help the environment. We gave them some structure, some tools. Give students structure, as I said, questions that they will have to answer, phrases that can be included in the speaking activity. Then we give students time to prepare and have students speak. So we have here integrated the listening and also the speaking. Think of an activity. All right, this time you're not going to think about the skill, but an activity that could follow the very last one. So when the student produces, when the student speaks, when he gives the input, what activity could follow this thing that the student just did? So please use the chat. Remember, no skills, but activities. Jessica, pair work. That is good because with pair work they can ask some questions and go deeper in the activity to expand the topic that we are working on. Brigitte, a writing project. That's good. Yeah, that is a good idea. And here we see that we are integrating also the listening, the speaking, and the writing. Okay, I would like some advices for kindergarten. This is a good question. When you have, different grades, and this approach, the integrated skilled approach, really fits all the requirements that we need. It can be from basic levels to advanced levels. We'll have to change the complexity, the structures, but the main idea, and what I want you to keep in mind, is that when you are using this approach, you need to focus on communication, because that's the aim, the goal that this approach wants to reach. A monologue about the good and bad of pandemic, Sylvia. Role play, Jenny. Thank you. Violeta, acting. That's great. Perfect, because when you are acting, you're also integrating other skills, Perfect, Soraya. A writing project. Speak how they feel. Patricia, that's very important to know how our students felt doing these activities. So it's really good to have their feedback, and because from that we can improve our lessons. So all right, let's finish here in the chat, although you have great comments. So we have seen, the integrated skill approach, and now I want to talk about the benefits. I will mention very briefly the benefits that this approach brings to our classes. So it exposes students to authentic and real-life language and promotes learning of real content. We are not keeping in mind the structure, but the content. Students are challenged to interact naturally in the language and to put their knowledge into practice in different communicative contexts. Either if you take the content-based or the task-based instruction, you will have different communicative context. One single topic can be fully explored, and vocabulary can be reinforced and recycled. Another benefit is that it brings variety into the classroom. Teachers can use a great variety of materials and activities in the classes. As I said also, teachers can track students' progress in different skills at the same time. Learners gain self-confidence as they get tools to interact in real-life situations. And, by feeling or having this sense of self-confidence, the motivation, students' motivation increases, which is very important in the learning process. And finally, it provides student-centered approach to language teaching in a classroom, which is actually what we want. We want that, the main character of the learning process will be our students. So to conclude this session, I would like to emphasize that interaction is essential when implementing the integrated skill approach, as it is the means and the main objective in language learning. So this is the session. Now we are going to move on to questions. So please type your questions in the chat. Questions, comments, everything is welcome here. Okay, we're still talking about activities that can follow the speaking activity that our student had. Right? No questions? I think the topic was really clear, or you know how to work on this approach. Diego, what can we do if we have shy students that won't talk? Speaking skills. All right, Diego. This is very important because when you talked about speaking, it's, I think, and according to our experience, the skill that frightens the students the most. Yeah, they don't want to make mistakes. They want to have great pronunciation. So if you use this approach, it will provide the students with some stages, okay? Because sometimes the fear that they have is that they are that they have to say something without preparation. So first of all, you need to help them build some structures that you know they are going to use at the end when they're going to produce, when they're going to speak. So it's very important to have the vocabulary, the phrases that you have there, to work in a context, to help them role play before. Maybe with shy students, you want them to do role plays before actually producing their own message. So it's little by little, but you know, if the student has all these resources, they are losing, you know, this sense of fear, and they can start working and improving their speaking skills. Sylvia, how can I make my students interact virtually? All right, so there are some video conferencing platforms that, you know, you can do breakout rooms and you can have students talk. So it's very important that right now, you know, because of the situation that we are living and this approach, the distance learning, we can we also need to work on communication, right? It's important, it's the main objective. So one way, and it's easier to work on the reading and the writing skills, but you need also to find a way, another platform, so students can actually talk. You can do recordings, all right? If your platform doesn't have that option to have students interact, recordings, what you want is students to produce, and they can send you the recordings, set videos, podcast, etc. Okay. For improving, there are so many questions. I lost track on this. All right. What could we do if my students don't want to show their speaking skill? Shy students, as I said, if we give them structures, they are willing to, you know, to work, and you can do it little by little. But the main idea is to have them interact, not just because they're shy. I'm not going to ask them to participate. I also need to encourage them to use it. And I need to have authentic material, topics that they like, because even if I have the person, you know, someone very, very shy, if I take the topic, a very interesting topic, that person is willing to break the silence and start talking. Even if it's a little bit, you can do it. And also when doing speaking activities, right, sometimes teachers tend to correct mistakes like right away on the spot. No, we need to let our students talk. They can make mistakes. We don't care. We want them to talk. So also you need to create that environment that is warm, that is, you know, that the student won't feel criticized. So that will help those shy students. For improving the oral skills for young children, what is the best way to integrate all the class engaged? All right. When you're working on oral skills, you can improve and you can engage that activity by working in pairs, in groups, all right? Because when you have a large class and you have 40 minutes, then all the students won't be able to participate. So what you want to do is to have small groups so all students can participate, all right? That's one way. Now that we have online lessons, Stefania says this, how can make all students talk if they are in large groups? Okay, Stephanie, as I said, if we have large groups, but we can do an activity, we can plan our activity and do group works. In that case, and students, all the students are able to talk, to participate. If you have a platform that allows you make groups with the students and you can go from one group to another, that will be fantastic because you will be able to hear all your students in one class. If you do not have access to this, ask students for for do recordings and send you videos, and in that way you can make the students participate. Colegio Juan Pablo. Some schools have problems with the time because it's too short for all the activities if you want to do everything and do it well. How can we solve that problem? All right. This has to do when we have, limited time, we need to plan the session and have some time management skills to plan and prepare each session. And if I cannot integrate all the 4 skills in one lesson, I will try to integrate 2, for example. But the most important thing is that I integrate 2 skills. One, that my students get input with another one that they have to produce something. Remember, also it's important when you are in class, that's the environment, like the place where they have contact to English. So we need to make our classes, as and use real language. And little by little, you can start integrating skills in different activities. So also you need to think of the time. What extra activities can be done in virtual classes? All right. Extra activities, you have tons of activities because as we have the computer, we have the internet, we have lots of resources. So it depends on the kind of activities that you want to give your students, to assign your students to do. It depends also on the objectives that you are having. For example, if you are working on a specific topic, let's say places in the house, so you can start by giving them more material from different websites, from songs, from videos, from TV shows. There's a lot of material for that, so you can choose whatever you want. Just think about the objective and the topic. It's very important that if you're working on a topic, you continue with that topic. What about including songs in class? Is it good? Violeta, it is excellent to use some songs, but not only to have a song, students listening to a song and no more. We need to do something with the song. So for example, you can start preparing your students with some vocabulary, some key vocabulary that you want your students to practice in that song. And keep in mind that you have to also take into consideration the students' level in order to assign the song, and also the structures, yeah? Because if, for example, you are also explaining something related to a grammatical topic, you also want the song to have something because you want to integrate. So then the students can listen to the song, fill out the blanks because they love that activity, I know, but then ask them questions about the song. And at the end, they can produce something like, for example, write a letter to the person that left the other one. Why did he leave the girl? Why did they break up, or something like that? So the idea, you can use all these materials, but the most important thing is that students have something to produce, to communicate. Joanna. Small groups are recommended to keep interaction in virtual classes when the students are very young. Okay, Jana, I don't think I have the whole Yeah, when the students are very young, and you want to work, to do pair work, to work in groups, you need to give just one instruction. Don't, fill them with so many things. Just one thing, little thing, like what did you do last weekend? Something like that. Something simple, because when you talk about, young kids, it's better to do small portions of knowledge and learning and teaching. Okay, how can we motivate the speaking skills virtually? Excellent. This is a great question because it has to do with motivation. That is something that, when teaching online and learning online is one of the challenges that we have. So students feel motivated when, for example, they have the time and the opportunity to present the work in front of the class, or they are asked to send you a video and you upload the video in the school's website, or and you reward students. So it's important to reward them to improve motivation.
I'm sorry, Jasmine, Miss Jasmine. We're going to have one more question, and then we're going to close the session. So you choose the question you want to.
Okay. All right. When we talk about integrated skills approach, we have to consider the 4 skills. But what happened with preschoolers? They don't read or write. What do you suggest? Excellent. When we have preschoolers, we can work a lot on listening and the speaking. Not necessarily the writing. They don't need to write like full things. You can start by chunks of information, right? Like very small structured sentences, something very simple, and you can help them, you guide them, but you don't leave them alone just to write, words, to fill in the blanks, but you want them to produce more, like speaking. That's why, like when someone is learning, a kid is learning a language, they don't actually do the writing or the reading, but you can work with the skills that they have, some that they can work on. All right, and that will be the end of the questions. And Juliana.
Thank you, Mrs. Jasmine, for your time. Thank you all. And if you have any other questions, you're having their support at richmondelt.com, so you can contact any of our speakers or any question you have through our email. Thanks to all for attending to this first day of our online Richmond conference. We will expect you all tomorrow for our second day of talks. Tomorrow we will focus on active learning techniques and strategies. We wish you have a great evening. Thanks for your time and participation. And remember, at Richmond, we have a solution designed for you.
Okay, and thank you very much.
Myself in the future. A world of opportunities opened up to me when I started studying with Richmond Solution. I was really able to learn autonomously. I could study at home, in the library, or in the classroom. I could dive into the book, or by being connected to the internet, I could explore fascinating activities that empowered my English skills. I was able to instantly access the answers as they were only a click away. I loved working in a team. My friends and I had great fun as we learned. I learned a lot from them, and I know that they learned something from me. The exams were always challenging, but thanks to the practice that was constantly available on the digital platforms, we were fully up to speed to meet these challenges. I am really going to miss my school.
Richmond's solution helped us hugely to transform the English program in our school. We have now got the best tools to guarantee the best learning. Let me show you. Part of the process gives us access to a coach who builds our confidence, as well as training courses to better our abilities and to continue our improvement. Yes, good teachers are always keen to learn more. As we live in the cloud, as we say in this connected world, we have digital resources to improve our classes and which allow our students to learn from anywhere in the world, even quite literally in the clouds if they are on board an airplane. Through the Richmond Test Manager and Learning Analytics, we have a variety of possibilities to test, validate, and monitor students' progress. It is amazing to be able to see how your students are learning and to have the evidence of their learning at your fingertips. This really does make us very happy indeed. Richmond's solution is a solution designed for you.